Imagine being forced to marry a complete stranger, and worse, a man living on the streets, all because of your own stepmother's cruel plan. That's exactly what Olivia faces when her stepmother, Victoria, decides to publicly humiliate her. Helena Moretti watched through the window of her luxurious mansion, her cold and calculating eyes focused on the impeccably maintained garden. Nothing escaped her control. She was the wife of the late magnate Jonathan Moretti, and since his death, had become solely responsible for the family's vast fortune. But her influence extended beyond business. She controlled everyone around her, including her current husband Robert and her stepdaughter Clara. Clara was the opposite of Helena. Although she lived surrounded by luxury, Clara had a kind heart and enjoyed helping those less fortunate. At 24 years old, she had a delicate yet determined presence. She often escaped the stifling opulence of the mansion to get involved in charity projects, donating food and clothing to those in need. Clara was inspired by the legacy of her biological mother, a woman known for her generosity and compassion. Clara's desire was to use the family's wealth to make a difference in the world. However, Helena saw this behavior as an affront. She believed Clara should act like a Moretti, valuing reputation and status above all else. For Helena, associating with the less fortunate was a disgrace, something that tarnished the family's prestige. She had repeatedly tried to dissuade Clara from these naive ideas, but without success. On that particular day, Clara was in the city center, distributing food to the homeless. On a corner, she spotted a man sitting on the sidewalk. He looked tired and haggard, with disheveled hair and dirty, worn-out clothes, but something in his eyes caught her attention. Clara approached slowly, holding a paper bag with a hot sandwich. "Are you hungry?" she asked, offering the food. The man raised his eyes, surprised by the gesture. "Yes, very. Thank you, miss," he replied with a weak but sincere smile. His eyes, though marked by exhaustion, shone with gratitude. This man was Gabriel. At 28 years old, Gabriel had spent the last few years living on the streets, moving from city to city, trying to survive the cold, hunger, and indifference of the world around him. For him, kindness was rare. Receiving that sandwich and Clara's kind look was something that warmed his heart in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. Clara sat beside Gabriel and talked with him for a few minutes, listening to a bit of his story. Gabriel spoke about the challenges he faced and how hard it was to keep hope alive. Clara felt a deep empathy. She knew no one chose to live that way and wanted to find a way to help more. But across the street, Helena watched everything. She was heading to a luxury store when she saw her stepdaughter sitting on the sidewalk, talking to a homeless man. A wave of fury surged through her body. How dare Clara lower herself like that? In Helena's view, it was unacceptable. It wasn't enough for Clara to insist on donating things to the poor. Now she was mingling with them. Back at the mansion, Helena couldn't get the scene out of her mind. She needed to do something to show Clara that her actions had consequences. It was unacceptable for the Moretti name to be tarnished by her stepdaughter's naivety. Helena began to plot a plan. It would not be enough to simply scold Clara. She needed a lesson that Clara would never forget, something that would make her rethink her behavior forever. During dinner that night, Helena confronted Clara, with a venomous smile on her lips. "You have so much fun on the streets, Clara, talking to beggars," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Clara tried to explain that she was just helping someone in need, but Helena wasn't interested in listening. "You need to learn your place. We are Morettis, and people like us do not associate with that kind of people," she continued, her expression hardening. Clara felt her stomach turn. She was used to her stepmother's criticism, but something felt different that night. Helena wasn't just angry. There was something more in her eyes, something dangerous and definitive. Clara tried to argue, saying that helping those in need was something her biological mother had taught her to do. But Helena cut her off abruptly. "Your mother was wrong," she stated coldly, "and I will prove that to you." While Helena plotted her plan, Gabriel continued his routine of survival. He thought of Clara, of the kindness she had shown, and wondered why someone like her would care about him. That brief interaction had awakened something inside him. Maybe, he thought, there was still hope for him. Maybe he could find a way out of that life and become someone who mattered. The next morning, Helena decided to act. She was convinced she needed to teach Clara never to mingle with scum again. Instead of simply punishing her, she would make Clara a public example. Her plan was to force Clara to get engaged to Gabriel, that same beggar Clara had helped. To Helena, this would be the perfect punishment. Clara would have to face the judgment of high society for marrying someone from the streets, and all her naive compassion would turn against her. Helena felt a dark smile form on her lips at the thought of the humiliation Clara would face. While Clara followed her routine of visiting social projects and tried to find a way to help more people, Helena approached Gabriel. She found him again in the square, and with a sly smile began talking about opportunities and changes in life. Helena knew exactly how to manipulate. She offered Gabriel a life he could never have dreamed of, a home, clothes, and the respect he never had. But there was a condition: he would have to marry Clara. Gabriel was confused and suspicious, but Helena was persuasive. She talked about how this marriage could help him change his life, and perhaps even help other people like him. It was an absurd proposal, but also irresistible for someone in his situation. He didn't have much to lose, and somehow maybe this could bring some change to his life. Clara had no idea what awaited her. Helena's plan was in motion, and everything indicated that the upcoming days would be crucial for Clara. The Moretti mansion, with its luxurious halls and perfect gardens, now became a stage for a cruel game, where Helena believed she had all the control. But little did she know that her actions were about to set off events that would change everyone's lives forever, especially Clara's and Gabriel's. The morning after her meeting with Gabriel, Helena was determined to put her plan into action. She had spent the previous night thinking through every detail of how she would execute her idea of humiliating Clara and showing her that her empathy for the needy was useless. Helena needed Clara to understand that her generosity, instead of being a virtue, was a weakness that damaged the Moretti family's image. Helena began by looking for Gabriel. She returned to the central square, where she knew she would find him again. Gabriel was there, sitting in the same spot, trying to ignore the hunger gnawing at his stomach and the cold that seemed even harsher that day. He hardly noticed Helena approaching. She looked different, wearing a long designer coat, her high heels clicking on the sidewalk, completely out of place in that setting. Helena looked at Gabriel with a mix of disdain and determination before she started speaking. "Gabriel, isn't it?" she began, forcing a smile on her lips. Gabriel nodded, unsure of what a woman like her could possibly want from him. Helena wasted no time, and with a seductive and confident voice, began to lay out her plan. She offered him something he had never imagined he could have: an opportunity to change his life, to leave the streets, to have a home, and live in comfort. However, there was a price. "To achieve that, you need to marry my stepdaughter, Clara," Helena said, watching Gabriel's reaction with a piercing gaze. He looked visibly shocked, not sure if it was a joke or a serious proposal. Helena continued, explaining that it would be a sham marriage and that Gabriel would be generously rewarded for it. Gabriel wasn't sure what to think. The proposal sounded absurd, but the promise of a new life was extremely tempting. He had always dreamed of leaving the streets, being able to help not only himself, but also others in the same situation. Marrying someone who had been kind to him didn't seem like the worst option, despite the evident discomfort of being used as a pawn in a game he barely understood. Seeing Gabriel's hesitation, Helena decided to put pressure on him, promising enough money to help his friends on the streets, people he knew also needed help. Gabriel, still hesitant, eventually agreed. He thought that at the very least, he could have the chance to do something good for those who were like him, abandoned and forgotten by society. Meanwhile, Clara was unaware of the plan being drawn up by her stepmother. In the mansion, Helena called Clara to a meeting in the office. As soon as Clara entered, she noticed something strange. Helena was smiling, but there was a rigidity in her gaze that put Clara on alert. "Dear, we need to talk about your future," said Helena, gesturing for Clara to sit. Clara felt a chill down her spine, but remained firm. Helena began talking about responsibilities, the importance of keeping the family's reputation intact, and how Clara was completely out of control. Clara tried to defend herself, saying that all she wanted was to help those in need, but Helena continuously interrupted her, making it clear that her stepdaughter's opinion didn't matter. Finally, Helena dropped the bombshell. You're going to marry Gabriel, that beggar you helped in the square." Clara was stunned, her breath almost stopping. "What? This is ridiculous, Helena," she exclaimed, her voice filled with disbelief. But Helena was not joking. She approached Clara, her tone cold and filled with threats, saying that if Clara did not agree to the marriage, Gabriel would suffer the consequences. "I could easily plant something illegal on him, Clara. You know how easy it is for someone in my position to do that, don't you?" Helena's threat made Clara feel as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. She couldn't believe Helena was capable of something so cruel, but her stepmother's gaze left no doubt. It was real. Clara knew Gabriel had no way of defending himself against someone as powerful as Helena. He was already facing so much hardship in his life and didn't deserve more suffering, especially because of her attempt to help him. Helena continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she described how Clara would have to do what is necessary for the sake of the family. To Clara, it was clear that Helena was determined to turn her life into a nightmare. Despite the fear and anger burning in her chest, Clara had no choice. Accepting the marriage was the only way to ensure Gabriel wouldn't be harmed by Helena's machinations, but accepting meant giving up her freedom and submitting to her stepmother's will. It also meant facing a public situation that Helena was clearly planning to turn into a spectacle of humiliation. Clara couldn't believe the irony of it all. She had tried so hard to do something good, and now it was being used against her in such a brutal way. She felt powerless in the face of Helena's power, but at the same time, a spark of determination began to ignite within her. She needed to protect Gabriel, and if that meant accepting the marriage, she would do whatever was necessary, but she would not let Helena win without some form of resistance. In the following days, Clara and Gabriel were taken through a series of appointments to prepare for the wedding. Gabriel was brought to the mansion and underwent a complete transformation. Elegant clothes replaced his tattered rags, his hair was cut, and his beard was trimmed. He looked in the mirror and hardly recognized himself. On the outside, he appeared to be a completely different man, but on the inside, he still felt the insecurity and uncertainty of his life on the streets. When Clara saw him for the first time after his transformation, she couldn't help but feel a pang in her chest. This man, who only needed an opportunity, was now being used as a puppet in a cruel plan. Preparations continued, and Helena was pleased. She manipulated every detail while Clara and Gabriel tried to understand what was happening to their lives. Society had no idea about the plan that was being set in motion, but everything was about to be revealed in a spectacular fashion. For Helena, everything was going as planned. Clara was being forced to submit, and Gabriel was the perfect tool to humiliate her stepdaughter and prove that her nonsense ideas about kindness and equality had no place in the Moretti world. But as Clara and Gabriel were dragged into this whirlwind of events, a silent bond began to form between them. There was understanding in the glances they exchanged. Both knew they were pawns in a much larger game, but somehow that brought them closer. Gabriel, who had previously been skeptical of Clara's intentions, began to see that she too was suffering. And Clara, despite the forced situation, began to see Gabriel not as a stranger, but as someone with a noble soul. Someone who, like her, just wanted a chance to be better. With Helena's plan taking shape, the tension only increased. Society, unaware of what was about to happen, would be in for a surprise. Helena was certain that Clara would be humiliated, and that Gabriel was nothing more than a disposable pawn in her game. But what she didn't know was that her seemingly perfect plan held twists beyond her control, and that the truth has a way of surfacing, even from the darkest shadows. Helena, satisfied with how her plan was progressing, sent a car to fetch Gabriel from the square where he usually stayed. When the luxurious car stopped in front of him, Gabriel felt a mixture of anxiety and disbelief. Inside the vehicle, the smell of new leather surrounded him, and he couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision he had made. He looked out the window as the world moved past rapidly, feeling increasingly distant from the life he once had on the streets. Arriving at the imposing Moretti mansion, Gabriel was led to the grand entrance hall, where he was dazzled by the grandeur of the place. Everything around him exuded wealth. The marble floors reflected the golden chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, and every detail, from the paintings on the walls to the majestic staircases, reminded him that he was in a completely different world. For a moment he felt out of place, as if he didn't belong there, and that was exactly what Helena wanted. Clara, who was upstairs reading a book, noticed the commotion and peeked out the window. Her heart pounded as she saw Gabriel getting out of the car, his clothes still shabby and his eyes full of confusion. Why did Helena bring him here, she wondered, feeling a mix of apprehension and curiosity. She knew that her stepmother never did anything without a dark reason behind it, and that moment would be no exception. Helena approached Gabriel, who stood uncertain in the entrance hall, and gave him a forced smile. "Welcome, Gabriel. We need to prepare you for the ceremony," she said, her tone dripping with disdain masked by false cordiality. Then she called a butler, who led Gabriel to a luxurious bedroom. The room had everything he could need, and more. A king-size bed covered with soft linens, a large golden mirror, and an adjoining bathroom with a marble bathtub that looked like a dream to someone who had spent years without knowing what comfort was. Gabriel looked around, unsure if it was all an illusion or reality. He felt a lump in his throat, a mix of gratitude for the unexpected comfort and discomfort at the situation he had gotten himself into. The butler pointed out that he should take a bath and offered him a set of elegant clothes. Gabriel entered the bathroom and watched as the hot water filled the tub. Slowly, he began removing his tattered clothes, feeling the tension and grime of the years on the street weighing on his shoulders. He sank into the hot water, and a sigh of relief escaped his lips. It felt as though, for a moment, he was shedding years of suffering and invisibility. While Gabriel was undergoing this physical transformation, Clara descended the stairs, determined to understand what was happening. She found Helena in the main living room, overseeing the preparation of some documents. "Helena, why is Gabriel here?" Clara asked, her voice firm but trembling. Helena looked at her with a cold gaze. "Clara, dear, it is time for you to start accepting your responsibilities. You are going to marry him," she said, her words sounding like a final verdict. Clara felt her entire body stiffen. She already knew that this was the plan, but seeing it unfold so quickly and right in front of her made the reality much heavier. "Helena, this makes no sense. You cannot force me to do this," she protested. Helena approached Clara with a disdainful look. "Oh, my dear, I certainly can. And you will do it, whether you like it or not," she said, "or else our dear Gabriel will pay a high price." Clara realized there was no way out. She would have to do what Helena demanded, at least for now. When Gabriel descended the stairs, now dressed in a perfectly fitted suit, Clara almost didn't recognize him. He looked different, but there was still something familiar in his eyes, that unbroken kindness, even in a situation of complete uncertainty. Their eyes met, and Clara felt a mix of sadness and connection. Gabriel seemed as lost as she was, and that made her feel an even deeper empathy. Gabriel, seeing Clara, tried to smile, but it was a timid, hesitant smile. He knew Clara wasn't to blame for what was happening. He also didn't want to be there, but he had promised himself that at least he would try to make something positive out of the situation. Gabriel extended his hand to Clara, and she held it firmly, as if trying to find strength in that contact. In the following days, Gabriel's transformation continued. Helena made sure to mold him to fit the family's image, ensuring he was ready for the engagement ceremony she planned to make into a spectacle. Every detail was planned to humiliate Clara in front of high society, and Helena enjoyed every preparation, convinced that she was in total control. Gabriel was instructed on how to behave, what to say, and how to act during the event. He followed the instructions, but inside he felt uncomfortable, knowing that all of it was part of a cruel plan. Clara and Gabriel spent some time together during the preparations, and although they did not openly discuss their feelings, there was a silent understanding between them. They were two people caught in a game they had not chosen, and that understanding bonded them in a way that even Helena couldn't foresee. One day, while Clara and Gabriel were in the mansion's garden, Clara decided to ask something that had been bothering her for days. "Why did you accept this, Gabriel?" Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. Gabriel looked at the horizon before answering. "I thought that maybe this was a chance to change my life. I spent so much time on the streets with nothing. Helena made me believe that I could help other people if I accepted," he replied, his voice full of a mix of hope and doubt. Clara saw the sincerity in Gabriel's eyes and felt a deep sadness. She knew Helena had used Gabriel's kindness to manipulate him, just as she was doing with her. "I'm so sorry," Clara said. squeezing Gabriel's hand. He just shook his head with a sad smile. Don't apologize, Clara. We were both caught in this. As the preparations continued, Gabriel began to notice something strange about Helena. There was a brooch that she always wore, a piece of gold intricately shaped into a rose entwined with vines. Every time he saw that brooch, a sense of familiarity hit him, as if it was something he had seen before. One day he decided to ask one of the older staff members in the mansion about it, but he got no clear answers, only suspicious looks. These small recollections started to awaken something inside Gabriel. He knew there was more to his past than he could remember. It was as if he was missing a key piece to understand who he really was. As the day of the engagement ceremony approached, this sense of disconnection and mystery only grew stronger. Helena continued her role as the architect of the situation, confident that everything was under her control. But quietly something was changing. Clara and Gabriel were starting to form a bond that transcended Helena's cruel plan. They were both discovering that, even in the most adverse circumstances, there was something that could not be manipulated: empathy, human connection, and the truth, which somehow always finds a way to come to light. The big day of the engagement ceremony had finally arrived, and Helena was more than satisfied. The entire high society was invited, and everything had been carefully planned to turn the event into a spectacle that would leave Clara humiliated. The mansion was decorated with an almost excessive luxury, with floral arrangements scattered throughout the hall and sparkling chandeliers, reflecting the grandeur Helena wanted to show off. Clara was getting ready for the event, feeling a mix of nervousness and sadness. She looked at her reflection in the mirror while the hairdresser finished her hairstyle. Her expression was resigned, but beneath that, there was a growing determination. Even in that situation, she refused to let Helena see her broken. If she needed to go through this to protect Gabriel, then she would do it, but she wouldn't let her stepmother take away her dignity. Meanwhile, Gabriel was also preparing. Dressed in a perfectly fitted suit, he looked at himself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize himself. He looked like a stranger, a character in a play that he hadn't chosen to participate in. There was a constant tension in his chest, but he tried to ignore it, repeating to himself that all of this could be an opportunity to change his life and help others, as Helena had promised. The guests began arriving and filling the hall, all eager to see the spectacle unfold. Helena, as hostess, made sure to greet everyone with a fake smile and affable words, while internally relishing the thought of Clara's impending humiliation. She knew that the news of Clara becoming engaged to a man from the streets would spread like wildfire, causing a great scandal that would put Clara in her place. When Clara finally descended the stairs, the entire hall turned to look at her. She was beautiful in her white wedding dress, but her gaze was distant, with a hint of sadness. Right behind her, Gabriel also descended, and the expressions of the guests shifted to disbelief and, in some cases, disdain. Clara approached the makeshift altar set up in the hall, and Gabriel soon joined her. The silence was almost oppressive, interrupted only by whispers and critical glances. But then, something unexpected happened. As Gabriel stood beside Clara, he noticed an elderly gentleman among the guests, someone who looked very familiar. The man looked directly at Gabriel, his face shifting from curiosity to shock. He moved toward Gabriel, his steps slow and trembling. You look so much like him. Jonathan Moretti, murmured the man, an old friend of the family. Gabriel was confused, but the man insisted. You have to listen to me. I need to speak with you, now. The man seemed anxious, as if he had just discovered something of vital importance. Helena, seeing the movement, tried to intervene, but she wasn't fast enough. The elderly man pulled Gabriel aside and began speaking urgently, his words rushing out. He told Gabriel about Helena's past, about her marriage to Jonathan, and about the mysterious disappearance of their son, a baby who had supposedly been kidnapped and never found again. Hearing this, Gabriel felt a chill run through his body. Memories that seemed so distant began to surface, and suddenly he understood. The brooch that Helena always wore, the golden brooch in the shape of a rose with vines, was the same one he vaguely remembered from his childhood. It was the only fragment that had remained with him, a small detail he had never been able to forget. Suddenly, everything began to fit together. He was the lost son of Jonathan, the heir to the Moretti fortune, someone Helena had removed from her path to ensure she had complete control over the inheritance. Gabriel felt his head spinning as the man's words echoed in his mind. Clara, who had noticed the commotion, approached, her face full of concern. "Gabriel, what's going on?" she asked. But he couldn't answer. He knew he had to act, and he had to do it there, in front of everyone. With a courage he hadn't known he possessed, Gabriel returned to the altar, now with a completely different purpose. He looked at Helena, who was watching with a mixture of suspicion and anger. Then Gabriel took the floor. "I have something important to say before we proceed with this," he said, his voice loud and clear. Everyone in the hall turned to him, and silence fell once again. "My name isn't just Gabriel. My real name is Leonardo Moretti. I am the lost son of Jonathan Moretti, the one that Helena made everyone believe was dead or missing," he declared, his words echoing off the walls of the hall. Shock spread across everyone present. Murmurs started to rise, and eyes turned to Helena, whose features had turned pale. For the first time, she seemed at a loss for words. Clara looked at Gabriel, completely stunned. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Gabriel continued, looking directly at Helena. "I grew up on the streets not knowing who I was, not understanding why I felt so out of place. Now I understand. You, Helena, took me away from my family, erased my existence to hold on to complete control of the Moretti wealth." Helena tried to protest, but her voice wavered. "This is absurd," she yelled, but Gabriel did not back down. He looked at the guests, who were now whispering and exchanging incredulous glances. "This woman spent years trying to keep power to herself, using everyone around her, including Clara. She brought me here today not out of generosity, but to turn all of this into a humiliation for Clara. But the truth has a way of coming out, and today is the day." Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief and understanding. For the first time, she saw Helena lose the control she so cherished. Gabriel, or rather Leonardo, turned to Clara and held her hands. "It was your kindness, Clara, that brought me here, that gave me the strength to face the truth. Your act of generosity that day in the square gave me the courage to listen and help someone who was going through a terrible situation." The hall was in complete silence. Robert, Clara's father, stood up, his face pale with disbelief. He looked at Helena as if seeing her for the first time. "Helena, is this true?" he asked, his voice laden with incredulity and sadness. Helena tried to respond, but her voice failed her. She was cornered, and all the judging eyes of high society were upon her. The engagement ceremony turned into a scene of controlled chaos. Gabriel, now recognized as Leonardo Moretti, made it clear he was no longer Helena's puppet. Clara, standing beside him, knew there was still much ahead, but she felt for the first time that there was real hope for justice and a new beginning. Helena, for the first time in years, seemed trapped. That night, which was supposed to be a humiliation for Clara, became Helena's downfall and the beginning of a new phase for everyone. Gabriel, or Leonardo, now had a new mission: to prove his identity and fight to bring everything Helena had done to light. Society, which had attended the event as a simple social gathering, now witnessed the collapse of Helena Moretti and the rebirth of someone she had tried to erase from history. After the dramatic revelations at the engagement ceremony, the Moretti mansion plunged into chaos. The high society, which had been summoned for an event meant to be a display of power and humiliation, was now witness to something much greater: the beginning of Helena's downfall and the rise of Gabriel, now known to all as Leonardo Moretti. Gabriel's words echoed in the minds of the guests as they left the hall, some in silence, others whispering in shock. Doubts and accusations quickly spread throughout the city, sparking a wave of indignation. The next day, the pressure on Helena intensified. The truth could no longer be hidden, and rumors soon turned into newspaper headlines. The press, once fawning, was now eager for every detail about the scandal involving Helena and the Moretti family. An investigation was opened into the death of Jonathan Moretti, which had previously been considered an accident, but now seemed to have new implications. The powerful, controlling figure of Helena was unraveling before the eyes of society. The woman who had manipulated everyone around her was losing control, and her carefully constructed reputation was beginning to crumble. Helena's assets were frozen while the investigations progressed. The mansion, which she had transformed into a symbol of her social victory, now seemed like a prison, surrounded by journalists and onlookers. Helena, for the first time in her life, was powerless. She no longer had control, and the connections that used to keep her at the top were quickly distancing themselves. Former allies avoided associating with her, fearful for their own reputations. The events of the past few days had exposed Helena's true nature, and no one wanted to be seen by her side. While Helena was sinking, Clara and Gabriel were beginning to emerge from all the confusion. After the engagement event, Gabriel decided not to waste time. He submitted himself to a DNA test, which was compared to samples from a distant relative of the Moretti family. The process was tense, with every minute of waiting feeling like an eternity. Clara stood by him throughout, offering the emotional support he desperately needed. And finally, the result came in. The DNA confirmed that Gabriel was indeed Leonardo Moretti, the legitimate son of the late Jonathan. The relief and emotion were immediate. Gabriel was now officially recognized as Leonardo Moretti, and the story of the missing son began to take on new proportions. Clara was by his side when they received the news in the family lawyer's office. She held Gabriel's hand, and both felt tears of relief in their eyes. That confirmation was not just a legal victory. It was proof that all the pain he had suffered up to that point had not been in vain. He finally had a name, a past, and an identity. The truth, so hard-won, was now in their hands. Robert, Clara's father, was also deeply affected by all of this. He was devastated by the revelation that Helena had kept such a dark secret. He had allowed himself to be manipulated for years, but now he finally saw Helena for who she truly was. The guilt was overwhelming. He felt responsible for not seeing what was happening in his own home. As a way to redeem himself, he decided to support Gabriel and Clara, helping them during the transition and using his influence to ensure justice was done. Robert became a faithful ally, determined to right past wrongs. While Helena prepared to face the legal consequences of her actions, Clara and Gabriel decided to focus on their future. They didn't want all that pain and suffering to end with just Helena's downfall. Instead, they chose to transform the experience into something positive. Gabriel proposed to Clara that they use the money recovered from the Moretti fortune to create a foundation to help people who, like him, were abandoned and forgotten by society. Clara agreed immediately. It was what she had always wanted, to use her resources and privileges to make a difference. Thus, the Moretti Harrison Foundation was born. Clara and Gabriel worked tirelessly to put into practice the idea of offering shelter and opportunities to those society marginalized. They opened shelters for the homeless, created rehabilitation programs, and provided education and training so that these people could reclaim their lives with dignity. The first shelter was opened in the city's most underprivileged area, and Gabriel made sure to be involved in every detail, for he understood better than anyone what those people needed. The wedding ceremony between Clara and Gabriel, which had initially started as Helena's manipulation, finally took place the way they both deserved, with love and sincerity. They held a small ceremony with only family and close friends, away from the high society spotlight. Clara was radiant, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown, and Gabrielle, now Leonardo, wore a suit that symbolized much more than just a special occasion. It represented the new life he had conquered. During the ceremony, Clara and Gabriel exchanged heartfelt vows. Clara looked into Gabriel's eyes and said, "No matter what we've faced until now, you are my strength, and together we will transform pain into something beautiful." Gabriel in turn declared, "It was your kindness that saved me, Clara. You brought me back to life, and today I promise to be your partner in everything, in love and compassion, and in our mission to help others." After the wedding, Clara and Gabriel continued their work with the foundation, now with Robert's support, who was committed to helping transform the city into a more just place. Robert felt that by helping the foundation, he was redeeming himself for all the years he had remained blind to Helena's true character. Gabriel's story, from a homeless man to Leonardo Moretti, the long-lost heir, quickly spread and touched the public's imagination. He became a symbol of hope and resilience. He began giving lectures at schools and universities, sharing his story, and inspiring young people not to give up, to believe that everyone has immense value, regardless of their circumstances. Helena, on the other hand, was now facing the consequences of her actions. The investigation into Gabriel's disappearance and Jonathan Moretti's death progressed, and Helena's past grew increasingly dark as more secrets were revealed. The life she had built on lies was collapsing, and her name, once respected in high society, now stood for deceit and cruelty. Former friends abandoned her, and what was once an empire of influence was now just a distant memory. Helena, who always controlled everyone around her, was now alone, facing the weight of her actions. In contrast, Clara and Gabriel were more united than ever. Their marriage, which initially began as a farce in Helena's hands, was now a symbol of true love and an equal partnership. On their quiet nights, they liked to sit on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset and talking about everything they had faced. For Gabriel, or Leonardo, the journey from the streets to reclaiming his identity had been full of challenges, but also filled with moments that showed the best of humanity. One night, while watching the sky change colors, Gabriel looked at Clara and said, "For years, I felt like I was searching for something I couldn't name. I was lost, as if a part of me was missing. Now I realize I was looking for this, a home, a purpose, someone to love." Clara smiled, holding his hand, and replied, "And I was looking for someone to help me turn my ideas into reality. Someone who understood that the true value of a life is in how much we can do for others." Clara and Gabriel's story began to inspire others. They became frequent guests at events where they spoke about their experiences and the importance of empathy and compassion. Gabriel visited schools and universities, telling his story not as a tale of victimhood, but as an example of what determination and kindness can do. He spoke about the importance of not giving up and always believing that something greater awaits, even in the darkest moments. The Moretti Harrison Foundation grew beyond expectations. Other members of high society, inspired by Clara and Gabriel's example, began to reevaluate their priorities and get involved in charitable initiatives. The shelters increased in number, and more people were being reached by the programs. The city, once known for its indifferent elite, was now gaining a new reputation, one marked by compassion and social progress. To Clara and Gabriel, this was the greatest reward. They knew they couldn't change the entire world, but they could make a difference in the lives of many, one step at a time. They dedicated their lives to this, using the resources they had to create a positive impact. Each victory, a person leaving the streets, a young person finding a job, a child finding a family, was a reminder that all the pain they had faced had been worth it. Months had passed since the day of the engagement ceremony, and the shocking revelation that had forever changed the lives of those involved. Clara and Gabriel, now officially Leonardo Moretti, were living a new chapter of their lives. They had gone through trials that tested their limits, but instead of letting the past define them, they used their experience to create something beautiful and transformative. The Moretti Harrison Foundation, which they had founded, was growing day by day, becoming a symbol of hope and change for the city. The foundation's mission was simple yet powerful: to offer help to people who, like Gabriel, had once been invisible in the eyes of society. In a short time, the foundation inaugurated its first shelter for homeless people, a place that offered more than just a roof over their heads, but also care, guidance, and the chance to start over. Gabriel was personally involved in every step, from choosing the location to meeting with social workers and other professionals who would be part of the project. The shelter was a reflection of Clara and Gabriel's philosophy. It wasn't just a place to provide food and shelter, but an environment for rehabilitation and rebirth. They created vocational training programs, offering courses and workshops to teach new skills to those who wanted to change their lives. Gabriel knew from his own experience that one of the most valuable things a person in a vulnerable situation could have was an opportunity. And that was exactly what he and Clara dedicated themselves to offering. Robert, who felt the need to atone for the past and support Clara and Gabriel, became an important collaborator for the foundation. He used his influence and connections to raise funds and promote charity events that helped maintain the shelters and projects. It was his way of redeeming himself and showing that, despite having failed as a father and husband, he could still make a difference. One of the most emotional moments for Clara and Gabriel was the opening of the Youth Training Center. Many young people living in vulnerable situations had never had the chance to attend school or learn a trade. At the center, they could study, have access to computer classes, languages, and other skills essential for the job market. Gabriel often visited the center talking to the young people and sharing his own story. He wanted them to see in him an example that it was possible to rise from the bottom and achieve something greater. Clara was also deeply involved. She used her access to high society circles to gain support and change the way people viewed the homeless. Clara organized charity events and invited influential members of society not just to donate money, but to get directly involved. She knew that for real change to happen, it was necessary to change people's perceptions of those less fortunate. Gradually, she began to see results. Many who once ignored or criticized were now becoming active parts of the movement to help. Meanwhile, Helena faced the consequences of her actions. The investigation into Gabriel's disappearance and Jonathan Moretti's death continued, and Helena's past grew increasingly darker as more secrets were brought to light. The life she had built on lies was crumbling, and her name, once respected in high society, was now synonymous with deceit and cruelty. Former friends avoided her, and what was once an empire of influence had become nothing more than a distant memory. Helena, who had always controlled everyone around her, now found herself alone, experiencing a fraction of the helplessness she had inflicted on Gabriel so many years before. In contrast, Clara and Gabriel were more united than ever. Their marriage, which initially began as a manipulation by Helena, was now a symbol of true love and an equal partnership. On quiet nights, they enjoyed sitting on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset and talking about everything they had faced. For Gabriel, or Leonardo, the journey from the streets to reclaiming his identity had been filled with challenges, but also moments that revealed the best of humanity. One night, as they watched the sky change colors, Gabriel turned to Clara and said, "For years, I felt as if I was searching for something that I couldn't name. I was lost, as if something was missing in my life. Now I realize I was searching for this, a home, a purpose, someone to love." Clara smiled, nestling closer to him, and replied, "And I was searching for someone to help me make my ideas a reality. Someone who understood that the true value of life lies in how much we can do for others." Clara and Gabriel's story began to inspire others. They became frequent guests at events where they spoke about their experiences and the importance of empathy and compassion. Gabriel often visited schools and universities, sharing his story not as a tale of victimhood, but as an example of what determination and kindness can achieve. He spoke about the importance of never giving up and of always believing that there is something greater waiting, even in the darkest of times. The Moretti Harrison Foundation grew beyond expectations. Other members of high society, inspired by Clara and Gabriel's example, began to reassess their priorities and get involved in charitable initiatives. More shelters were opened, and more people were being reached through the programs. The city, once known for its indifferent elite, began to earn a new reputation, one marked by compassion and social progress. For Clara and Gabriel, this was the greatest reward. They knew they couldn't change the entire world, but they could make a difference in the lives of many, one step at a time. They dedicated their lives to this, using the resources they had to create positive change. Each victory, whether it was a person leaving the streets, a young person getting a job, or a child finding a family, was a reminder that all the pain they had faced was worth it. As the years went by, Clara and Gabriel looked back on their journey with a mix of awe and gratitude for what had brought them to where they were. What had started as a cruel plan of vengeance and manipulation by Helena had turned into a beautiful story of love, redemption, and transformation. They proved that regardless of circumstances, true love and kindness are powerful forces that can overcome even the greatest adversities. More than that, they showed the world that with determination and compassion, it is possible to turn the pain of the past into a future full of hope. And so, under a starry sky, Clara and Gabriel continued side by side, committed to their mission of making the world a better place, one act of kindness at a time. If you like this exciting story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This way, you help us continue to bring you more incredible stories. And don't stop here. We have a special selection of videos waiting for you. Click on the links on the screen to watch more stories full of drama, mystery, and emotion. Your next exciting journey is just a click away. See you there.